For centuries, a massive mystery has remained buried somewhere in the mountains of Mongolia. Where is the tomb of Genghis Khan, one of the greatest conquerors in history? Where was he actually laid to rest? Historians have been searching for his final resting place for hundreds of years, but so far, all they've found is failure. In August 1227, the great Mongol ruler Genghis Khan died at around 65 years old. But how he actually died remains a mystery to this day. One of the oldest sources of Mongolian history, The Secret History of the Mongols, says that Genghis Khan fell from his horse while hunting, became seriously ill, and eventually died. Other historical accounts suggest that he died during his final military campaign. The 13th century traveler Marco Polo told a different story. According to his account, Genghis Khan was struck by an arrow in the knee, and an infection from the wound later caused his death. According to tradition, Genghis Khan wanted his burial place to remain hidden so that no one would ever be able to find it. And over the centuries, several chilling stories emerged about how his final burial was supposedly kept secret. One popular tradition claims that people involved in the funeral, and even those who happened to see the funeral procession, were killed so they could never reveal the location. Another story says that after the tomb was completed, thousands of horses were driven over the site to erase every trace that a burial had taken place there. The location most commonly associated with his tomb is Burkhan Khaldun, a sacred mountain in Mongolia. Some Mongolian traditions also say that his tomb should never be disturbed. For some, this is a way of respecting his final wishes. Other legends warn that disturbing the tomb could bring misfortune or even disaster. And then there's another mysterious theory. Based on interpretations of a 17th century Mongolian historical source, some have suggested that Genghis Khan's body may never have been brought to the location where people believed he was buried. Perhaps an empty coffin was buried to mislead anyone searching for the tomb, while his actual body was buried somewhere else. Centuries later, the search for his tomb continues. Archaeologists have spent years investigating possible locations. Maury Kravitz devoted decades to the search, while modern technology, including satellite imagery, has also been used to examine potential burial sites. But to this day, no definitive evidence has revealed where Genghis Khan was buried. April 1945. World War II was entering its final days, and Nazi Germany was on the verge of defeat. During this chaos, 19-year-old German soldier Willy Herold became separated from his unit and fled. Along the way, he discovered an abandoned car containing a German officer's uniform. Herold put it on. And that's where this unbelievable story began. Wearing nothing more than the uniform, he presented himself as a high-ranking officer and claimed that he had received direct orders from Adolf Hitler. Several soldiers believed him. Before long, Herold reached a prisoner camp in the Emsland region and took control of the prisoners there. He then used his fake authority with devastating consequences. Under his orders, more than 100 prisoners and military deserters were killed. The war was only days away from ending, yet this ordinary soldier, transformed into a fake officer, used his stolen authority to take dozens of lives. Eventually, the war ended, and Herold's true identity was exposed. British authorities arrested him. He was tried for war crimes and in 1946 was executed by hanging. Today, the idea of throwing an animal into the air for entertainment would seem unbelievably cruel. But in 17th and 18th century Europe, a strange sport known as fox tossing, or fox throwing, was actually practiced. The game used a long strip of cloth or a sling-like platform laid across the ground. A fox or another small animal was placed on top of it. Then, people standing on both sides would pull the cloth upward at the same time. The animal would be launched into the air, and the goal was simple: whoever could throw their animal the highest won. Foxes weren't the only animals used. Depending on the location, rabbits and other small animals were also thrown as part of the game. One well-known example comes from a large festival held in Dresden in 1696, where large numbers of animals, including foxes and rabbits, were reportedly used in the sport. At the time, activities like this were considered entertainment, but for the animals, the result could be severe injuries or death. Over time, attitudes toward animal cruelty began to change across Europe, and forms of entertainment like fox tossing gradually disappeared. Today, fox tossing is remembered as one of history's strangest and cruelest sports, a reminder of just how differently people in the past viewed animal suffering. March 21, 1945. World War II was entering its final stages, and Denmark was still under Nazi German occupation. In Copenhagen, a building known as the Shell House was being used as the headquarters of the Gestapo. Prisoners were interrogated there, and important files connected to the Danish resistance were kept inside. At the request of the Danish resistance, the British Royal Air Force launched an extremely dangerous mission to destroy the headquarters. The mission was called Operation Carthage. Flying at low altitude, British Mosquito aircraft were supposed to drop their bombs on the Shell House. But during the mission, something went terribly wrong. An aircraft from the first wave struck a tall lamppost and crashed near the Jeanne d'Arc school. The fire and thick smoke from the crash were visible to the pilots following behind. They mistakenly believed that the crash site was the target. And then, several aircraft began dropping their bombs on the area. But the Gestapo headquarters wasn't there. It was a Catholic school filled with children. The bombing devastated the school. 86 children and 18 adults, including several nuns and school staff, were killed. Dozens of others were injured. The most heartbreaking part was that the RAF's actual target was about 1.6 kilometers away from the school. Operation Carthage did ultimately destroy the Gestapo headquarters and severely disrupt its operations, but the mission came at a terrible cost. Archaeologists excavating an old cemetery in Poland discovered several graves where unusual precautions had been taken with the bodies buried inside. Some skeletons were found with bricks placed inside their mouths, while others had been pinned down with heavy stones. But why? It's believed that local people at the time considered some of these individuals to be vampires. They feared that the dead might rise from their graves and return to harm the living. Some of these people may have suffered from illnesses that caused their skin to become unusually pale or their bodies to look different before death. Without modern medical knowledge, people may have interpreted these symptoms as signs of something supernatural. Because of that fear, the bodies were sometimes restrained or weighed down after death to prevent them from leaving their graves. But there is no evidence that these people were actually vampires. Today, these graves offer a fascinating glimpse into how fear, disease, and superstition could influence burial practices centuries ago. In 1940, thousands of Polish military officers, police officers, and civilians were taken into Soviet custody by the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. Around 22,000 Polish citizens were murdered. This included roughly 14,500 prisoners of war and about 7,300 other prisoners. The killings took place not only in the Katyn forest, but at several locations across the Soviet Union. Many of the victims were shot and buried in mass graves. But then, an even darker chapter of the story began. In 1943, mass graves were discovered in the Katyn forest. Germany accused the Soviet Union of carrying out the killings, but the Soviet government denied responsibility and instead blamed Nazi Germany, and that denial continued for decades. The Soviet regime refused to acknowledge responsibility for the Katyn Massacre, leaving the truth buried beneath political conflict and propaganda for years. But eventually, historical documents began to reveal what had really happened. On March 5, 1940, the Soviet Politburo approved the execution of thousands of Polish prisoners. Documents that later came to light established a direct connection between that decision and the killings carried out by the NKVD. Then came April 13, 1990. For the first time, the Soviet government officially acknowledged that the killings at Katyn had been carried out by the NKVD and recognized them as one of the crimes committed under Stalin's regime. In other words, for decades, Nazi Germany had been blamed for a crime that the Soviet state had committed and denied. But eventually, the evidence forced the truth into the open. So, what did you think of the video? If you have any thoughts about one of these stories, let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.